uploaded a video on the Harriers on the dev server, suggesting that they would be absolute gimmicks. Now, I have received a lot of comments on that video suggesting that the video has aged poorly, such as this particular comment here, the list goes on, so I'm just going to let them sort of scroll onto the screen and you can have a look at them. Maybe yours is up there, so thank you for commenting nonetheless. So let's actually talk about this. I'd like to have a discussion about the Harrier, its effect on 9.3 battle rating-ish in that sort of area, or 9.7, and kind of what goes on and why. So let's actually talk about the Harrier's performance before we get into the SRAMs. It's literally the way I described it on the dev server. The Harrier is not good at turning. It's also fairly decent at climbing. And it is certainly not good at low speed despite having that thrust vectoring ability. So, what's good about it? I think you can tell by the background footage, the missiles are absolutely insane. SRAMs are the same ones that we get on the Hunter F6, except the Hunter F6 sits at 10.0. 10.0 has a little bit better competition. So what is the solution? First and foremost, I want to get straight to the point here. The solution is to put the Harrier at 10.0. It is essentially a Hunter that has a lot less energy retention, but a much better climb rate. So I genuinely don't see why the Hunter F6 and the Harrier GR1 can't sit at the same battle rating. So let's have a look at the gameplay now that we've sort of gotten that one out of the way. Nice little fireball effect, I'm not really sure what from, but nonetheless Dagor 6.0 is actually quite beautiful, and it comes with, as you might have heard in the introductory montage, a new soundtrack. That is actually War Thunder OST, so that's very impressive, I have to say. It's not very often that I get blown away by a game's soundtrack, because I don't really care for music, with the exception of, say, Halo Reach. That was pretty poignant and really nice OST. But that was really something else. Anyway, on to the gameplay. You can see an F100 who has been distracted by a big fat juicy SU7. Now the SU7 doesn't turn well as the F100, but the F100 is being baited by the SU7 intentionally in order to get an SRAM straight onto the F100D's booty. If that isn't beautiful teamwork, I don't know what is. That SU7 deserves, I don't know, a commendation of some sort, a medal. Now, one of the biggest things that I've found about people fighting the Harrier is turn fighting. Now, I understand that the Harrier is quite fast, but in an F100 you actually can outrun it. And I find a lot of F100s, particularly F100s, turn fighting the Harrier and, of course, losing because the SRAMs have an effective range of about 2 kilometers, or I guess you can launch them from about 1.2 going at full speed in a sort of chase situation, and you'll normally tend to hit most of your targets. So having a look at this particular gameplay here, notice the A4B who's getting really close, but I have a Harrier friend to back me up. Now this is really important for the Harrier because it sucks at turning and it bleeds a lot of speed in turns. So it's basically the worst dogfighter in the entire game. And I mean that seriously. This plane is an absolute bus at its battle rating. Sure, it might have been well renowned for turning well in its heyday or in its service life, but that's probably because it's being compared to things like the F-14, the Phantom, which are a lot faster and as a result have a greater turning circle, which gives the impression that the F4 doesn't actually pull as many Gs or turn quite as well. But the Harrier is actually really crap at turning. It's probably worse at turning than the Hunter in some cases, and in fact in many cases I would consider the Hunter in some cases a better dogfighter. The Hunter also retains a lot more energy. However, like I said earlier, the Harrier has a better climb rate because it's got, I don't know, some sort of magic that comes from the 1970s. Anyway, notice again in the gameplay that my opponents, or the people that I'm getting kills are either sort of asleep at the wheel or turning. And this is something that I'll sort of demonstrate to you in the next few clips, where we're actually not going to have a look at the Harrier itself, but we're sort of going to have a look at how to fight it. Now, this particular enemy here is an F2 Saber. He's gone for a little roll and decided to stop. That's a big no-no. That's a rather large no-no, in fact. So, this particular plane, we all understand that it is very strong because of the SRAMs, and I don't think any more needs to be said on that matter. So, how about fighting? Here, I'm in the F2 Saber, and I'm in a little bit of a dogfight here. So, whilst this plays out, I'm going to give you a couple of tips, rather, a couple of sort of generalized tips that you can put into use as a plane that is slower, but turns better. So, these are things like the MiG-17, the F2 Saber, the MiG-15 BIS, the A4B, basically anything up to about 9.3 battle rating can more or less outturn this thing. Anything higher, we're looking at things like the F100, the English Electric Lightning, which you won't fight a GR1 in unless you see a mixed battle, but that's going to be extremely rare. The F100 is a big one, and of course the Su-7 and MiG-21F. Now, whilst the MiG-21F does have insane maneuverability, it does bleed a lot of speed for its, for its caliber and for its battle rating. So you do have to be a little bit mindful, and I would play in the same category as the F100 and the Su-7 in this case. So, our first thing that we want to do is we want to keep our speed. And you'll see, you might think, well, if you're turning, why would you want to keep your speed? Or if you can turn better than the Harrier, why would you want to keep your speed? And there's a very good reason for that. The Harrier, whilst it doesn't turn well, has SRAMs that turn very, very well. And in order to dodge something like an SRAM, you need a fair amount of airspeed. And you will end up dumping a fair bit of that, and that's fine. But the biggest thing to keep in mind is that if you have speed, you have a lot more of an ability to dodge missiles. You'll find this with faster planes if you fly the Harrier GR1 and you find, say, a MiG-19 PT somehow outturns your missile. That's because the missile doesn't always pull the same amount of Gs, and if you can force your plane to pull a little bit more, well, you have a little bit more chance there at not dying, basically. Keeping your speed is a really big one, because if you can do that, you basically already have half your battle won. Unfortunately, in this case, I didn't adhere to rule number 2, which is pick 1v1s. If you're going to fight a Harrier, make sure you pick a 1v1. The 1v1 is extremely important, because that means that it forces them into either booming and zooming, which is something that you can engage alongside, because the Harrier has poor energy retention in a turn, or alternatively, if the Harrier goes into a dogfight thinking they can beat you, you're going to win that every single time, provided that you don't colossally fuck up something like, I don't know, turn outside and then inside, or decide to fly in a straight line for some odd reason. So in this case here, I am actually in a 2v1 against this particular Harrier, and you can see how easy it is to outturn them, especially at high speed, and you can see how low, or how slow the Harrier is after 1 or 2 turns. They dump absolute metric shit ton of speed. Speaking of dumping a lot of speed, oh dear, poor Javelin. Poor Javelin in this matchmaker. So horny for kills that he ends up ripping his little wings. I love the Javelin, but my god, no one knows how to fly that thing. And I don't blame them, because it is a ridiculously difficult plane to fly. So, rule number 2 is pick 1v1s. Or, if you can, pick 2v2s, if you really have to. Ideally, you outnumber them, and that's how you manage to get kills. Not flying through their gun stream, because that is another really sort of stupid thing. So, Swift F7 decides it wants to come in, and I'm going to sort of stick with this Harrier, because if I can get this Harrier with my buddy here in the F86F, then I have a bit of an easier time, but unfortunately, I'm getting boom and zoomed by 2 Swift F7s, and the Harrier and the F-Saber basically take each other out. So now I'm left in a pretty crappy situation. So your third rule is don't be in a crappy situation like this. Avoid getting within multiple engagement situations, and that's easier said than done. If you can adhere to that, then by all means definitely do that, but if you can't, I understand. And the fourth thing that I'd like to bring up is don't be within 2 kilometers. in front of a Harrier. 2 kilometers in front of a Harrier is the kill zone. It's the spot where those missiles are most effective. And again, you can see trying to get these Harriers to dogfight is very, very easy. They're committing to it quite well. And the only thing that I'm really worried about here is Swifts, because they're boom and zooming, which is causing more of a hassle for me than the Harriers are, because, yeah, that Harrier decided to bonk himself into the ground. Well, unfortunately, I didn't keep enough speed, and I also didn't see that particular situation there. So, the final thing is, try and stay outside that 2 kilometer range. These last 2 clips here I'm going to show you are exactly how bad the Harrier it is at dogfighting, to the point where the F11 can turn inside. So I honestly, if you can sit behind a Harrier, meaning sit on your air brake while you've got multiple opponents around, or while you don't have multiple opponents around, or while you've got multiple friendlies around, you actually can get yourself a fairly good time in the fighting Harriers. It's not easy. This thing should be 10.0. But until then, I hope these give you a little bit of direction on how to fight the Harrier, because it is a very tough plane to fight in a plane that is a lot slower. But do remember, it is an absolutely shit dogfight. That is one thing that cannot escape it. It doesn't dogfight well, even at these really low speeds. Even with this sort of thrust vectoring, you can get a couple of weird little opportunities, but it's never going to stick with you. And of course, multiple engagement situations. Someone is always going to come out of the cloud, someone's always going to come out of nowhere. Working as a team is paramount. Anyway, ladies and gents, thank you for watching. Hope this helped. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.